Okay. Have you ever questioned how costume constructs time, place, and self? History plays a vital and influential role in the formation of national, cultural, and individual identity. As such, representations of history on film and television carry significant weight in the public's understanding of these identities. The fantasy genre often draws upon the medieval period to authenticate its fictional world building. Although these stories are not intended to be a source of educational content, their reliance on historicized aesthetics constitutes a type of historical engagement, one that informs popular imaginings of the past. Costume functions as a primary authenticating feature of these worlds. Clothing constantly evokes ideas of the past. The very nature of its materiality is directly determined by time and place. Costume in a fantasy series necessitates a type of temporal play, as it must navigate three worlds: the fantastic world in which it exists, the historical period which serves as its inspiration, and the present world of the audience. This essay examines the interconnectedness of dress, history, nation, and identity as it is presented in Game of Thrones. It examines the costumes of Sansa Stark, a key female character whose clothing demonstrates how she understands herself in relation to others and where she locates herself within broader social systems of class and culture. Game of Thrones, created by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, is an award-winning television series adaptation of George R.R. Martin's fantasy novels, A Song of Ice and Fire. Spanning 8 seasons, the record-breaking show has become a touchstone of 2010's popular culture. The show immerses audiences into the fantasy world of Westeros, a land largely inspired by medieval Europe, with particular emphasis on Scotland and England. Game of Thrones exists within broader traditions of cinematic medievalism, where cultural preoccupation with the Middle Ages is perpetuated through film and television. The overall tone is rather bleak and presents a world of violence, mutilation, and deep psychological trauma. Game of Thrones falls into a type of cinematic medievalism described by Laurie Fink and Martin Scheiman as one that, quote, associates the medieval with the barbarity, superstition, and violence from which civilization, modernity, is supposed to have rescued us. Costume plays a key role in locating Westeros within an identifiable Western European medieval framework. While the costumes often have non-European or non-medieval details, the overall approach to dressing plays into audience expectations of conventional medieval dress on screen. Clothing speaks to a society's values, economics, culture, and politics. In order to achieve verisimilitude, the costumes in Game of Thrones must function similarly. Thus, the Northerners wear dark furs, while King's Landing aristocracy wear lightweight, richly colored silks. These distinct aesthetics provide visual cues to remind viewers of each character's cultural and geographic origins, which usually determines their politics and informs their worldview. Female costumes are particularly nuanced because highborn women are strategically married off to form alliances between kingdoms. This enhances the complexity and visual interest of their costumes, whose development tells a story of their cross-cultural journeys and shifting identities of maiden, wife, captive, sexual object, and/or leader. Style transformations usually occur gradually and read as a story of fashioning the self. To borrow Emma Tarlow's term, a sartorial biography acknowledges, quote, the complexity and transformative potential of personal experience in the creative and symbiotic relationship between people and their clothes. The subject plays an active role in determining their wardrobe and curating their own sartorial biography. This is especially true for Sansa Stark, who in the very first episode states that she makes her own clothing. Therefore, each piece she wears exists as a skillful and creative act and the result of a series of thoughtful, conscious, stylistic decisions. Sansa's sartorial biography begins when she is 13 years old, living with her family in the north. She wears simple dresses featuring necklines adorned with intricate knots. Michelle Clapton, the costume designer for all 8 seasons, designed the knots as indicators of prepubescence in the north, stating that each knot would be embroidered to represent a task that the girl had mastered. Sansa becomes infatuated with the prince and moves to King's Landing. Her style shifts slowly, as the knots around her neckline become flowers, demonstrating her desire to join this new culture. Later, she fully adopts the prevailing style of paper silk front wrap gowns. When Sansa becomes trapped in the politics of King's Landing, dragonflies become a reoccurring motif in her costumes, symbolizing her feelings of entrapment. Through her embroidery, Sansa demonstrates an ability to identify, express, and productively work through her emotions. Unable to confide in anyone, embroidery becomes a safe means of private contemplation and a meditative process of creation. Sansa's embroidery can also be read in relation to Opus Anglicanum, England's famed medieval embroidery work. Medieval textiles were often instructed, painted or embroidered with symbols meant to convey ideas or stories to viewers. This connects Sansa's styling to broader historical traditions of medieval dress, intertwining ideas of individual and national identity. Dress speaks to a tension between individuality and social expectation. Sansa's clothes demonstrate how she navigates this tension by incorporating personal touches into garments that also adhere to prevailing fashions dictated by the tastemaker. Sophie Woodward identifies the act of getting dressed as an important moment of self-construction. She argues that it is an exercise in creating a publicly presented self within the private domain. When Sansa is thrust into perilous court politics, it becomes critical that she meticulously and selectively constructs a public self that armors her against persecution. The personal touches she applies to her clothing subtly shift her temporal position from historical to contemporary. Her early use of natural embroidery motifs gives way to modern minimalist statement jewelry. As Sansa gains power, she shifts from miserable medieval princess to hardened modern power dresser, blurring the boundaries of past and present. Her most dramatic style change comes when Sansa escapes from King's Landing. Her wardrobe turns dark and takes on the northern attributes that connect her to a family she has largely lost. Before the 14th century, wearing black was reserved for mourners and monks. It has since accrued varied and often contradictory meanings, but modern viewers are likely to associate black with a symbolic darkness, seriousness, and sophisticated fashion. This absence of color plays into 2000s fashion trends and counterculture movements that appeal to viewers' stylistic sensibilities and ideas of powerful women. A statement necklace made to resemble a sewing needle is added to her wardrobe. This needle references her sister Arya's sword, which is also named Needle, and represents Sansa's newly discovered inner strength and battle readiness. For a show that largely devalues traditionally feminine attributes, such as compassion and mercy, the symbolism of a sewing needle as weapon recognizes a concrete power in a domestic practice. Sansa's final costume, her coronation gown when she becomes Queen of the North, reads as a story of her formative relationships. The same fabric was worn by her friend Marjorie Tyrell. The multi-paneled skirt, narrow sleeves, and fish scale embroidery references her mother's style. She wears her needle necklace for her sister Arya and pays tribute to her brother Robb in the design of her crown. The feathers and direwolf embroidery serve as reminders of past style choices and past self. Fitting for a series finale, this gown is built as a culmination of her journey. Instead of dressing to emulate the older women around her, Sansa has constructed her own style identity. Even more significantly, she has constructed it based on an awareness of the formative relationships in her life. Sansa's mature wardrobe plays into the series' themes that equate gritty and dark with authenticity, in this case, the expression of a developed true self. A brightly colored, almost whimsical medieval aesthetic is exchanged for a subdued and fierce sartorial medievalism. Clothed in heavy furs, dark textiles, and metallic accents, Sansa enters a new adult chapter of her life. Sansa's tale of identity formation is situated within a broader story that explores a moment of political crisis playing out across a pseudo-medieval Britain. The inspiration for characters, themes, and events in the show can be traced to specific moments in Britain's history. Belen Vidal argues that examining moments of political crisis are a particular strength of monarchy films, which perform an important myth-making and myth-breaking function for the British nation. This type of fictionalized history, one that claims the medieval as a significant period in a specifically British past, influences ideas of British nationhood. The overwhelming success of the show reveals audiences' desire to engage with this type of fictionalized history and identify with morally complex characters. Sansa's character evolution is not only an engaging plotline, but also a reminder of the role storytelling plays in developing our understanding of self and making sense of the world around us. There's some of my sources.